I'll be debating Lexi today, as you know, and I just wanted to set the stage here first. So on April 30th, 1945, as the Allied forces were moving in on Berlin, Adolf Hitler, the leader of the National Socialist Party, took his own life in a bunker. And from there, a whole cascade of events set off that really changed Europe and ended an era of violence and repression. And so over the next couple of years, Germany was divided up by the world powers, the USSR, USA, as well as France and Britain. And in May 1949, West Germany was given an official name, official political standing as the Federal Republic of Germany. So the Federal Republic of Germany now faced really a monumental task of rising up from the ashes to reform a people, a government, and just a way of life. And perhaps the biggest obstacle to this rebirth was really the past and how they handled it and how they came to terms with really a whole people that was kind of damned from their past in World War II, especially in the connection to Nazism. So in the 1950s, Germany's stuff this passed away. Showings of movies depicting the Holocaust were restricted. Amnesty was given to Nazi soldiers who had a 3-year sentence or less. And really, talk of events, the Holocaust, everything was mysteriously non-existent. And as the first chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany says, Konrad Adenauer, on the one hand, Adenauer felt that a prudent silence was better than a provocative public recital of the truth. Germans of that generation were too morally compromised for democracy to work, except at this price. That's from Tony Judt in Post-War. Germans weren't able to reconcile their past. It was too soon after the war. So the question is, should West Germans have taken a closer look at their past, or were they right to repress it? And what I'm going to say is they were. They were right to repress it, and my argument focuses on 3 main points. The first is the inflaming of right-wing movements. If there was talk of, and really hatred of the past and alienation of from former German soldiers, they would run the risk of inflaming these right-wing movements that might rise up and destabilize this democracy that they were trying to really form. The second idea is that it was the quickest path to democracy. Maybe it wasn't the most efficient, but at this time, Germans were exhausted, as were the rest of Europe. And Germany just really needed the easiest path to democracy. And they also needed focus elsewhere. They needed to focus on industry and politics and just reforming themselves and getting them up off the ground. My third point is that it worked. I mean, Germany today is one of the biggest really economic forces in Europe and in the world, really. And they did a good job in really coming to terms with their past. Eventually, in the 1970s, as Lexi showed that study, they kind of realized it's time to get up with our past. And they really addressed Nazism and World War II history in general. So my first point is that kind of the biggest fear of Europe and the rest of the world at this time was the fear of the Nazi return. Judt speaks to how in December 1951, just 5% of West Germans surveyed admitted feeling guilty towards the Jews. And so there was always this risk of inflaming kind of that right-wing ideology that caused World War II and the rise of the National Socialist Party. And there really wasn't any remorse felt just yet. And with that way, it was going to be so easy to kind of inflame these fringe groups and really incite the entire population, as no one was really innocent in Germany at this time. As we saw Adenauer say, Germans were too morally compromised at this point, and really there was always just a storm looming in the background of the possibility of the return of Nazism or another right-wing movement. In this really interesting article, Amnesty and Amnesia, Jeffrey Hirth, he reviews another book that was really interesting. He speaks to how Adenauer talked about how it's so extraordinarily minimal and so extraordinarily small. There had been no breach in the honor of the former German Wehrmacht. No one may reproach the career soldier on account of their earlier activities. When Adenauer sent such signals, he was seeking to discourage a right-wing revolt. So he was keeping from alienating a population who had the ability to revolt kind of at any time, and a population that felt like they did nothing wrong. And so if any trouble was going to come, it was probably going to come from the almost 1 million plus soldiers and their families that really felt offended by kind of this attempt at denazification after World War II by the Allied forces. So first point, right-wing revival, keeping it tampered, not talking about it, not inciting this population that was really a powder keg was essential. Second point, convenience. For the time being, it was the quickest path, and the quickest path is what really West Germany needed at this point. It allowed for the focus on industry and other areas to really stabilize an economy and kind of let people, West Germans, focus on creating a national identity and maintaining something they really didn't have right in the immediate post-war years. In the Jeffrey Hirth article, he speaks to how the author of the book says, yes, democracy came to West Germany in a way of convenient amnesia and prehistory amnesty. Politicians found it easy to rationalize the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance, it was. And in the end, as I spoke to earlier, it worked. Not addressing the past was easy. I'm not going to argue it's right. It was right away. But Europe was just too fragmented. Everyone was too exhausted to really discuss that right after. And Judd, the attention of West Germans in the next 2 decades after Hitler's defeat did not need to be diverted away. He continues to speak to how it moved towards consumerism and industry. He also speaks to how in place of devotion for its rulers, Germans started to forge a national identity focused around precision and efficiency. So Judd speaks to this kind of rise in industry, this focus on industry to create a national identity, as opposed to kind of having all of these trials and this like public reconciliation of the past right away. Instead, the focus needed to be on industry and not with this great kind of reflection, at least right away. My third point is it worked. Today, Germany is a pillar of economic prosperity and stability. And I'm not saying that reconciliation shouldn't have come. And it did, it just came later. It came in the 1970s, as Lexi was speaking to this study. I won't read the quote because Lexi talked, she spoke well to it. But eventually, Mr. Bozeman's kind of published his study on his findings. And as we can see, teachers have set up extra courses to study the Nazi era. So it kind of set off this wave in the 1970s, reconciliation and recognition. In the other article, Ashes to Affluence, a great article in the LA Times. Only in the last 5 years have Germans launched their own intensive look into history, so that was written in 1985. So that again is speaking to kind of this final reconciliation, recognition in the 70s and the 80s. So, I mean, we spoke also in class last time, or 2 times ago, about how Italy kind of didn't allow access to the records, they didn't want to talk to the past, and we said how Germany kind of had this good relationship with it, and how records are available. It's maybe not the easiest thing to talk about, but you can. So that just kind of shows how it did work in the 70s and the 80s when they were able to address it. So from amnesia to industry to reconciliation, it worked. Kind of my rebuttal to kind of some ideas that Lexi brought up and some ideas that I think you could try to poke holes in my argument. One could probably say right wing, too big of an issue to stamp out. Or that's my point. So someone could say that you shouldn't just ignore the past. You shouldn't let these right wing movements do whatever they want. Instead, you should confront them immediately. I argue that it was too widespread of a view in general for the population. There wasn't enough people to stamp out the right wing because everyone was condemned. West Germans needed the easiest path, not the most effective. One could argue effectiveness better than efficiency. I argue everyone was too exhausted in post-war Europe. They needed the path of least resistance. And kind of rebuttal to Lexi's points, she briefly mentioned how it might form a more stable democracy. And I argue that a stable democracy was never even kind of available until 1990 when East and West Germany united, because there was always kind of that looming idea of East Germany, and kind of the Federal Republic of Germany never really felt whole. And until that could happen, there was never going to be a stable democracy anyways. And then the ignorance idea, sometimes it's bliss. It really let the entire population focus on what was important, maintaining cultural ideas, setting these cultural ideas, working on industry. And this ignorance led to a better kind of reflection in the 70s and the 80s when it was ready and it was time to move on. And then finally, my conclusion, I'm not arguing that Germans should never reconcile with the past. I'm just saying the 1950s wasn't the time to do it. When they eventually did in the 70s and 80s, it was at a time where West Germans were ready to look back, and this younger generation, as we saw, didn't know much about it, and they realized it's time. So not looking at it in the 50s, let West Germans focus on other things more important, like getting their country back on their feet. And the eventual reconciliation later really set the stage for a country that's aware of itself. So even though they didn't do it in the 50s, they did it eventually, and it worked out that way. Thank you.